What I would say, because we should be serious, and I think you try to be serious, you make an effort. What we should be talking about is the following fact. By every metric, every available metric, Israel's crimes in Gaza are in a class all their own. There's nothing like it, not just in the 21st century, even by some metrics, like tonnage of bombs dropped, density of destruction. There's nothing like it going back to World War II. Israel has created an apocalypse in Gaza. And bear in mind where it chose.
As I'm sure that's something that would be quite proud about as well. Israel's unparalleled achievement in Gaza. Welcome back everybody to Z's Political Couch. Israel's masterclass in devastation, truly a spectacle for ages, surely. Standing alone atop the rubble-strewn podium of modern warfare. Who else could turn a densely packed strip of land into an apocalyptic wasteland with such precision and flair? The world watches in stunned horror, knowing that despite the collective outrage, these innocent children trapped in this inferno have no cavalry coming to their rescue. A sad glimpse of a modern-day reality.
To locate the apocalypse, an area 26 miles long, 5 miles wide, repeatedly described by witnesses, including Israel's former head of the National Security Council, repeatedly described as a concentration camp. Israel has created an apocalypse targeting a concentration camp, half of whose inmates are children. So, if there is outrage and indignation at what Israel is doing, and if for a period of time this outrage and indignation dominated news headlines, it's not because, in my opinion, the international community or the international public is anti-Semitic or prejudiced against Israel. The horror that it has inflicted in Gaza is simply unspeakable. I was reading the past couple of days the new Amnesty report on Gaza. It's 300 pages, 296 pages. And it alleges, with voluminous documentation, that Israel's committing genocide in Gaza, not in the dictionary definition of genocide, but the technical legal definition based on the Genocide Convention of 1948. Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. I then last night, after finishing the Amnesty report, without missing a beat, I then turned to Lee Mordecai's report documenting the genocide in Gaza. So it seems to me there's ample reason for the international community to give disproportionate attention at this particular moment, even though it's now dropped out of the news cycle because of Syria, to give disproportionate attention to the horror that's been inflicted on this God-forsaken people, who, as you know already from having read my introduction, have suffered in a concentration camp, judging by what neutral observers have said, and they were even referring to the period before Israel occupied Gaza, namely the period when it was under Egyptian administration, already back in the mid-1950s. That means 70 years. 70 years These people have been living in a condition that has been persistently described by outside observers as a concentration camp. And now, as some people have put it, not without reason, the concentration camp since October 7th has turned into an extermination camp.
If
Now,
you don't,
you have,
we might get to that later, but if you don't mind, we've got limited time, so I just want to get into the next
you
bit.
mentioned the question of North Korea. Let me just give you one statistic which I found quite astonishing. A new report was put out this week by this organization called Air Wars, AIRWARS. I think it's British based. They pointed out that in the first 25 days of Israel's assault on Gaza, 1,900 children had been killed. In the darkest days of the Bashar regime, the darkest days, 2017, okay? The largest number of children killed for any 1 month during the darkest days of the Bashar regime was 239 versus 1,900 for 25 days. And then they point out, if you take the darkest year in Syria, 2017, the whole year, as many children were killed in Gaza in 25 days as were killed under Bashar al-Assad for the whole year 2017. It's an awesome, a breathtaking achievement what Israel has done to those God-forsaken people.
So the reason I brought up North Korea wasn't that we should have a whole debate on North Korea, but more as a comparison to say, there's between the Gaza and West Bank, there's 5 million people.
All right, I just made a comparison with Syria. Syria is in everyone's mind. Bashar was a butcher. Bashar was a monster. Bashar was this and Bashar was that. I'm not going to dissent. I'm not going to disagree. But I'm saying, look at the record. Compare what Israel did in 25 days from October 7th to October 31st to what Bashar did.
But the point is, why I'm comparing it to Russia is because of the UN, of how much they've condemned, North Korea, how much they've condemned North Korea, which have 25 million people in, compared to Gaza and North, that's 2
I'm
3
not
million.
going to debate. Look, I have a very firm credo. No investigation, no right to speak. I've not studied it. I'm not going to talk about it.
Okay, so let's move on then. So another quote of your book was, trapped in the vice of Israel's criminal blockade, Hamas desperately endeavored to carve out a path to normalcy. It tried diplomacy. How did they try diplomacy?
Well, I give one quote from an extensive record. In fact, there were numerous peace initiatives by Hamas trying to feel out how to solve the conflict according to international law. I'm not saying that Hamas suddenly became converted to international law. It's one of the realities of power. So let's just take a comparative example. The PLO, as you know, the Palestine, or you might not know because you're too young and I'm too old. The Palestine Liberation Organization was known as a terrorist organization in the West. Come around the early 1970s, the PLO starts gaining a certain degree of respectability among international institutions. In 1974, the head of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, he makes a famous speech at the UN. It's called The Gun or the Olive Branch, in which he says, we're giving you a choice. By 1976, and it's been exhaustively documented at this point, By 1976, the PLO is on record supporting a two-state settlement along the June 1967 borders. Does that mean that Arafat suddenly became converted to international law or UN resolutions? No. It meant that once you become a principal player on the world stage, you cannot operate outside international law, or else you are marginalized.
So Hamas
Hamas,
never said they want a two-state solution.
allow me to finish. Hamas won the election in 2006. It was now a responsible political party in power. And at that point, Hamas sent out many feelers, just like PLO in the 1970s, indicated it was ready to negotiate a settlement along the June 1967 borders. However, I don't have any stake in misrepresenting the facts. The international law says that the refugees from 1947 have a right to return. Now, it is correct that Hamas had not given up on the right of return, and it had a right not to give up on the right of return because that's the law. Amnesty International has said it. Palestinian refugees have the right to return. Human Rights Watch has said it. Palestinian refugees from 1948 have a right to return. So Hamas had indicated it was willing to settle the conflict along the terms of the two-state solution as enunciated in 1,000 by now UN resolutions, but it wasn't willing to give up on the right of return. And legally, it had the right to preserve the right of return. So I am perfectly willing to acknowledge. I said in what you read, would you mind reading it?
Sure, do you want, shall I read it again?
Yeah.
Trapped in the vice of Israel's criminal blockade, Hamas desperately endeavored to carve out a path to normalcy. It tried diplomacy.
Right, and now read what I said.
A 2009 study by a US government agency concluded that Hamas had been carefully and consciously adjusting its political program for years and had sent repeated signals that it might be ready to begin a process of coexisting with Israel.
Exactly.
Norman Finkelstein's display of intellectual jiu-jitsu, he absolutely floors Eli, unraveling Israel's double standards with the finesse of seasoned debater, armed with reports and facts thicker than a New York deli sandwich. Norman points out how Israel's actions in Gaza don't just tippy-toe around genocide, they practically cannonball into it, all while the world watches, eyed wide open, but powerless. Meanwhile, Israel's PR machine probably has a medal ceremony in the works for this achievement. Norman doesn't just stop at the horror show. He sprinkles in a bit of dark humor, highlighting how Hamas, like a patient student, tried the diplomacy playbook, only to get smacked out instead of a handshake. In the end, it's clear Norman isn't here to play. He's here to drop truth bombs, and Israel's double standards got exposed. If you like this video, please share, like, and subscribe. And if you enjoy videos such as these, where we expose the harsh truth hidden underneath propaganda, join us on our next one. Until then, be bold, be true, and be courageous.